Okay, so I'm back with Carrie Brummer, who I spoke to back in 2015. We met at the Alive in Berlin conference, and I remember how sort of early days, I guess it was for me, in terms of things that you were telling me about, Carrie, and as you told me about the transition that you were making. Can you just remind us quickly, what was the transition that you had made at the time when we first spoke?
Absolutely. So I was teaching in the classroom. I'm an art teacher, and I'd been teaching for, I guess, 8 or 9 years at that point. And I moved into administration, and I just kept feeling this drive to do more and serve more people. And I had this little voice kind of telling me I wasn't doing enough. So I went into this admin position and started to realize that it wasn't the right path for me. It wasn't satisfying or quelling that voice. And in fact, that voice was
Mm.
getting louder. And I had this moment where I was having a tough day with a colleague, and I said, I wish this was just taken out of my hands. I'll never quit this job because I've committed, but I kind of wish it was taken from me. And within 2 hours, my now husband had called me to say he had a job transfer offer. And so we ended up moving to Muscat, Oman. We had been in Dubai at the time. And that was this opportunity. And literally, when he called, I just had this like flush through my body. And I was like, I know I'm supposed to be doing stuff with my blog and my business, which was Artist Think at the time.
Mm.
And that was literally this kickoff point for me to start making my kind of online community.
Mm. So the universe kind of came together for you then.
Yeah, it really felt that way. It was just like, okay, sign me up. I'm
Yeah.
in.
Great. And what have you been working on since? What's changed for you since we spoke in 2015?
So initially, my company was called Artist Think, and I was looking into getting a trademark for it, and I realized that I actually couldn't trademark the name. So I decided to rebrand. And initially, I was actually really upset about this and felt like it was a sign of failure, that it wasn't working out, and I'd been blogging not as a business, but just as a kind of hobby blog for years under this name Artist Think. So I was afraid my whole community would leave me and that no, just kind of all this panic of change is bad. And yet actually it was the best thing that could have happened in some ways because my community rallied with me and it grew significantly during this transition. And actually people in the community came up with the new name, which is Artist Strong. And someone had sent me an email saying, Carrie, I actually feel like you make me artist strong. And as soon as I read that, I just actually kind of got really teary and was like, I think I found the name. And it had been like weeks of drawing in notebooks and trying to figure out things. And it made me realize that life is more of an experiment than we give it credit for, and that we need to be treating whatever we're building that way too, instead of feeling like there's this one direct path, an answer to find whatever it is, because we all have different paths, and in fact, what we're aiming for is going to be different for each of us as well.
So can you tell me more about that? Because that sounds really interesting, experimentation. Because when we first quit, I think we sort of maybe naively think that, hooray, we've done it. That's the decision. Ta-da! Dream job. I've created it. And that's going to be, yes, it's going to be hard work, but that's it. And this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. And I think probably in my experience, that's not going to be the case. Certainly the last 4 or 5 years for me. What do you mean by experimentation? And what have you sort of found along the way?
That's a great question. So I guess I would start with saying it's a lot harder than I realized going into it. And in fact, during that branding time, I actually thought about quitting. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, this is so stressful. I can't handle this. I have no income coming in. I've messed everything up. I've spent all this money on my business. What am I doing? And I had this panic set in of all this investment and time for software and infrastructure and resources and going to conferences. And I'm like, I've messed this all up. And then once I rebranded and I saw this shift and I had a huge kind of influx of subscribers, I realized that that led to that happening.
Mm.
That if I hadn't had all of these moments that felt really hard and that made me think about quitting and made me wonder what I was doing and did I know what I was doing, which of course I didn't, that's how you find it all out. That's how you discover what you're doing. And I feel I'm a recovering perfectionist. And so for me, if I label things in a very black and white way, I have to achieve it a certain way. Otherwise, it means that I've failed. And that's not productive in this kind of world. And so when I think of things instead as an experiment, that I'm trialing different things out to test them out to see if they're going to work, then I don't feel that black and white pressure of failure or success. It's more of how will this information help me make better decisions for my community?
And I guess with that experience then in mind, would you add any advice to somebody, again, sort of thinking back to a few years' time, what advice would you have given yourself as you started out? What might you have done differently or what kind of tips would you give?
How long do you have? Uh, so I would say the first thing I'd tell myself is stop researching so much because, again, tied to that recovering perfectionist personality, I want to know all the information and make sure I know everything really well before so I can make an informed decision. And yet there's lots of good information out there. And again, that's not me. That's not the people I'm serving. So that doesn't mean it's going to work for me. I need to like kind of read through it all, pick out what kind of intuitively clicks with me and try it. And if it doesn't work, then go, okay, well, maybe I'll try this resource and see if that works for me. And I had so much pressure of I must do it all a certain way, and that will help me get success. But you can't, that's a controlling kind of quality that doesn't help you actually grow. It's a way to stay smaller, in fact, because you're not taking the risks you need to learn the information that helps you make informed decisions. I think that was a really big holdback for me. I think I would have been a lot further along had I given myself permission to kind of experiment with software or strategies for collecting new clients or even new programming. I think I put a lot of pressure on trying to make it all really good to start without really being connected to the people I serve.
Well, that's really tricky because I think we do compare ourselves to other either gurus or people who are sort of similar to us in that space, but maybe 5-10 years ahead of us. And I remember listening to someone who actually is my coach now, and she said on some kind of podcast, like, I did 17 webinars before it worked for me, and I thought, oh, I've done one. And I sort of expected it to be like, ta-da, I've done webinars now, you know, and it was actually successful in terms of, you know, decent number of people coming on, and I got a client out of it. But it's just funny how, you know, I think as well, I guess the recovering perfectionist is a good title, thinking that like, of course this is going to work and it needs to work right away, otherwise you give up and you know, you give up too soon, I think, rather than pushing through that failure. And as you said, your biggest success and transformation can actually come from that so-called failure.
Exactly. And I do think that we celebrate online none of the in between. We celebrate everyone in the very beginning stage who's just starting out and giving them resources and kind of selling them the dream. And then we see the dream in action for people who, you know, always talking about 6 figures. I feel like that's like just thrown out all the time as some kind of measure of success. And yet it takes time to get to wherever you want to go. And we never talk about the in-between. You know, before we started the recording, we were talking about me launching my program, and I'm in the 3rd year of starting to launch a mastermind program. And only now do I think it's starting to be profitable for me. And that's not a bad thing. That means that it's finally working. And I've had 2 years to run the program at a smaller scale to make sure I understand how to best serve the people I want to serve. And now I can repackage and make sure that I'm really up-leveling all the content each year to serve better. And I think that the program is going to be stronger and have greater legacy because I'm giving it that time. But we don't, you know, if we have a sale or a launch of a program that's only a couple $1,000s or even something like $10,000, you know, initially in the beginning we're like, yes, we've made it, and then we're like, oh wait, we can't even pay ourselves a salary yet. I'm not, you know, maybe I'm not making it. But that's how you get to whatever 6 figures or whatever else it is that you're aiming for. And we don't celebrate this in between.
The in-between, I think that's great. Maybe that's the name for a program in itself. We need to we can sell that. I'm not sure how easy that is as a sell, because as you said, it's easy to sell sort of the dream at the beginning and then that sort of 6-figure ideal. But by the way, it's much harder than you think message is probably not so appealing as a benefit. But I think I agree with you, definitely very important. Great. Well, congratulations on the success of your group program and the rebranding and so on. It's great to catch up with you, and maybe let's reconnect in a few years' time and see where Artist Strong has evolved from there.
That sounds great. I'd love that. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you, Carrie.